For the man who uses well what he is given shall be given more, and he shall have abundance. But from the man who is unfaithful, even what little responsibility he has shall be taken from him. And throw this useless servant out into outer darkness, and there shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Capitalism. There's a lot of myths about capitalism. And we need to deal with those myths before we get down to the truth of what a free market and capitalism is all about. First, there's the pious myth about capitalism. The pious myth. It says, well, it's just inherently wrong for somebody to have more than anybody else. But that story Jesus told is a story of capitalism, is it not? If those three men had been socialists, when the man came back for accounting, he would have said, I'll tell you what let's do. We started off with 8,000 together, and we made 15,000. And let's just tell him the three of us had made 15,000. Let him divide among the three of us. That's socialism. That's not capitalism. Jesus is talking about you and I using what we have. Whether it's one gift, 2 gifts, 10 gifts, when we start with where we are, God multiplies the giftedness that we have in every single area of life. That we need to understand. Because there's a pious thing about capitalism we need to explode. Because some people see in the pious good intentions, I'm going to do something, I'm going to help somebody here, but it has what we call unexpected, unintended consequences. Okay? Here's a true story, a class in a university, economics professor. First day, they're talking with the students and the professor about the class. He discovered they were all thoroughgoing socialists. So he said, well, what about this year as we take tests? We'll just average a test and everybody in the class will make the same grade. You're a socialist. They said, we like that. So they took the first test. Some studied hard, some studied a little, some didn't study at all. The average grade was a B. The A students were upset. The lower students said, boy, I like this socialism. They took their second test. The average grade was a D. Boy, everybody was upset, but nobody studied much. Took the third test. The average grade was an F. That's the way it works. You see, they had good intentions. We'll all average our grades here, and that'll be the thing to do. But it had those unintended consequences. True story. My dad came from large families. My mother came from a family of 11 children. My dad came from a family of 9 children. And many of them did not go to school very much because they worked on a farm. All the children worked. Some later on began to go to school. Some finished high school. But of all of my cousins and nephews and all the family up to me, I was the first one to go to college. Out of all of those children, all of those cousins, I had the opportunity, the privilege to work my way through, and to do that, many of them never had a choice. They had to work. And some of them never went to school hardly at all. But as the economy was lifted, child labor laws came into effect, and things were straightened out in our land. In 1992, the U.S. government saw that a lot of clothes that you and I wear and shoes were made in Eastern countries. These Eastern countries, they had what we call shops of children who were working in those sweatshops. And they saw it was unsafe conditions, and they were working children at a very early age. And so the U.S. Congress passed a law that America would no longer buy clothes that were made with child labor. And they passed that law. Now, if I'd been in Congress, I would have said, we don't want clothes where they're making these children work in these sweat factories. I would have voted, hey, I'm for that. Just don't buy their products. Now the camera is turned off. What happened? 2 years later, UNICEF studied it. Had to go back and ask the question, why were those children working in those industries? So they could upgrade their iPod? Or get a TV set for their bedroom? They were working to stay alive for their families. And a lot of those industries got all the children out of laboring. What happened to children? UNICEF says over 35,000 of them went to work in rock quarries, which is highly dangerous work, but most of them were sold into child prostitution. You see, we have good moral intentions, but unintended consequences. You see it? And when you begin to move economic levers over here, it sounds good and fine, but you have unintended consequences over here. This is what has happened in our current economic crisis. Exactly what has happened. Now let's look at the two great economic crises that we're familiar with. First is the Great Depression. We've heard about that. Some few here lived through it. Some of us remember our parents talking about it. It happened in 1929. And the talk on the street today and then about the Depression in 1929 and the economic tsunami we're in right now, you would hear the talk on the street. What caused this? Greed on Wall Street. Slime in the ice machines of Wall Street. That's what caused it. That's what you hear all the time. But I looked into this, and that's not the primary cause. It was the cause in 1929. No liberals and progressives and pseudo-intellectuals would tell you that. There was a roaring 20s, and the stock market soared up. It was overvalued, and it lost a lot of value there. In 1929, the market went down. There was a crash. But the normal recovery of the market was taking place. And by 1930, in April, the market was back up some 300 points and was recovering. But a Republican, Herbert Hoover, was president, and he said, we don't want to waste a crisis. Does that sound familiar to anybody? So the Republican president taxed the people more than they were being taxed. The feds shut down the supply of money. They passed severe tariff laws that hurt the balance of trade. Foreign trade was curtailed. And therefore there was a lack of liquidity, the lack of money in the market. And suddenly the market crashed again, and it didn't bottom out until 1933. Then there's another myth that came along that we elected FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and he bailed us all out with all of his federal programs. That's not true. All of his New Deal and Second New Deal didn't bail us out. We began to recover as a result of World War II. And so we see the problem then was the lack of liquidity. Now in 2008, what happened? Greed on Wall Street? No, that's not the primary thing. You have to go back a little bit. Graham and two others sponsored a bill in 1929 that took down the barriers between banks, insurance companies, and brokerage houses. So all of a sudden, all of these people, by definition, naturally were divided from one another, and now they became very incestuous and opened up the pathway for the crisis we experience. When all of a sudden there was the word out with good intentions, everybody ought to own a home. Sounds good, I'm for it. Nobody could be against that. But the problem was loans were made to people who were unable to live up to those loans, who didn't have the credit rating, didn't have the income, didn't have the ability to pay for those homes. But then you had Fannie and Freddie, those quasi-banks who said, I'll back up anything. And they pressured banks, pressured entities to make these loans that would not stand up. And then they took those loans and sent them to Wall Street, and they bottled them up into bonds, and they sold them around the world. All of a sudden, instead of about 800 or 900 million worth of these, it became 43 trillion all around the world because of the surplus of money. And all the time, Barney Franks, Chris Dodd said, we've got your back. Just keep on doing it. Keep on doing it. But when home values went down, the car hop in Las Vegas, who owned 4 homes, all of a sudden he was in jeopardy. He was in default on all 4 of his loans, needless to say, overextended. And this was like a domino effect that went all across America and all around the world. Now follow me carefully. The problem in 1929 was a lack of liquidity. The money was squeezed. There were no money available. In 1929, it may have been a good idea for the government to do some bailout program because money needed to be brought into circulation. They did the very opposite in 1921. They took money out of circulation. The Feds did not print money. In 2008, the problem was not a lack of money. The problem was not a lack of liquidity. The problem was debt. And our all-wise leaders, from Bush now to Obama, like it was from Hoover, a Republican, to Roosevelt, a Democrat, Bush, a Republican, to Obama, to a Democrat, they made the same mistake. And today, they're treating the problem in 2008 as if it were the same problem in 1929. 1929, it was liquidity, and now it is debt. Different. And I do not believe anybody can believe in normal kind of common sense economics that we can come out by continuing to step on the accelerator when it's already stuck to the floor. So let's see exactly how we got in this mess. This is not in order of their importance, but this covers the basic entities, and you can pick out the one you think was the most disastrous. Number 1, artificially suppressed interest rates, pressured by Congress to make risk loans to low-income borrowers, irresponsible regulators, compromised credit rating agencies, flawed risk mitigation device, a giant pool of foreign capital seeking investment, easy money available, gluttonous consumers, that's us, greedy commercial and investment bankers in search of easy fixed income. Now that's how we got here in this mess. Mainly perpetuated and begun by the federal government, and Wall Street is ready to move in the gap anytime, 24/7, to take advantage of those opportunities. Now, where are we today? America lost more than 25% of their collected net worth. That's all of us. We've lost, last year or so, 25% of our net worth, every one of us, more or less. The S&P 500 stock index was down 45% to its 2007 all-time high. Housing prices dropped 20% from their 2006 peak. If you sold one, you knew that. If you have one, it's worth 20% less. Total home equity dropped 32%. Retirement assets dropped 22%. Household wealth was down 14 trillion. Unemployment rates, not 10%, more likely 17%, because a lot of people who are trying to get a job have given up. So this is where we are today.
You're listening to The Winning Walk with Dr. Ed Young, and today's message is called A Broken Wall Street. We have a special resource for you today we want to send to you. It's a booklet by Dr. Young called Culture Wars. It's our gift to thank you for your donation to support this broadcast. Request a copy when you call with your donation, 1-800-350-WALK. That's 1-800-350-9255. Dr. Young wrote this booklet to bring clear biblical thinking to 3 of the critical battlefronts that have erupted in our society today: homosexuality, abortion, and God's view of marriage. So please give us a call to request your copy, 1-800-350-9255. This is the last and final day of this offer, so please call now and request a copy of Culture Wars.